Welcome to Taking the Next Step, a presentation about planning for success in post-secondary education, brought to you by Ask Resource Center. During this presentation, information will be provided that will answer some important questions about preparing for post-secondary education, primarily for those students with disabilities. We will answer the questions why it's important to attend some kind of education after high school, how attending college is different from high school, what can be done during those high school years and the transition planning process that can help assist or set a student up for success, and how can accommodations be used for success in post-secondary education. Though some of these topics could relate to all students, it's important to remember that the focus of this presentation is for those students receiving special education services. As we start our discussion of post-secondary education, it's important to establish a couple of definitions. Post-secondary education generally means any education or training that happens after a person leaves high school. There are formal types of post-secondary education that most people typically think of, such as college, universities, trade schools, or any other formal program that usually results in a student earning a degree or a certificate. There are also informal types of post-secondary education, such as community experiences, internships, job shadowing, mentorships, all that are valuable, but often do not lead to a certificate or a degree for the student. During this session, the focus will be on formal types of post-secondary education and will typically be referred to in the general idea of formal education with interchangeable terms such as college, university, or post-secondary education. A good place to start is looking at the benefits of post-secondary education, and really to answer the question, why is it important? The idea of education beyond high school differs from what typical idea of going off to college. It's important to focus on what post-secondary education is intended to provide for all students. It provides additional education and skill building that allows a young person to function as an adult and be employed in the community. Really, it provides opportunities to practice skills and have increased responsibilities. It increases employment and lifetime earnings. Many new jobs require post-secondary education. Today, unskilled jobs are increasingly hard to find. Most jobs require an applicant to have some level of post-secondary education. Increased social circles and networks. College or time after high school is a time when people engage in areas of study or particular interests and meet people who have shared those interests. Friends and contacts are made, and having a network of social contacts is how many people find job opportunities. It's an age-appropriate activity. There are many transitions that youth are expected to make when they finish high school and enter adulthood. These might include moving out of a parent's home, becoming more self-sufficient economically, and going to college, seen by many as what youth do at that age. But like we said, education, or what that post-secondary education experience can look like, can be very different for individuals. There are many types of post-secondary education institutions available to students, and increasing options for students with disabilities as well. There are, of course, traditional four-year universities. There are community colleges or liberal arts colleges, technical college or engineering, technical or vocational school. There are some military programs, business school programs, online schools. Really, it's important for families to find options that best fit their youth's career goals and academic skills. If traditional post-secondary setting is not the best for a student, other programs exist. Job Corps, AmeriCorps, Project Search are just a few examples, and other federally funded youth employment programs. Workforce centers, high school guidance counselors, and vocational rehabilitative services staff are good sources of information to start looking into these different options. As we start exploring the education that happens beyond high school, this is one key important factor, that a student with a disability needs all the same skills as any other college student, plus any special skills, strategies, or accommodations needed as a result of that disability. There's a quote from the Collegiate Consortium of Disability Advocates that states, "Having the same skills does not mean that all students have to perform at the same level, but rather students with disabilities will have to do the same coursework with accommodations." So college students with disabilities are expected to complete the same coursework, juggle the same responsibilities as their peers without disabilities. The Collegiate Consortium goes on to say that going to college comfortable with one's self and one's own needs will make the difference between success and failure. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means and the disclosure of disability. It is important also to start acquiring skills in an environment where they know and are familiar with, which is high school, rather than waiting until you arrive at a college or a post-secondary education environment to practice those skills and especially develop those self-advocacy skills. Comparing post-secondary education programs to those of high school education system is really like comparing apples to oranges. Colleges and post-secondary education programs, expectations of students, including those with disabilities, often differ greatly from those expectations in high school. A high level of competence is expected, and all students are expected to complete the same coursework regardless of the disability. That is why the accommodations and getting those adequately documented and approved is so critically important to a student's success. There are fewer tests, cover broader bases of information, and how those tests are conducted may differ also. The way in which the information is taught and the setting that it's taught in may also pose new challenges. All of these reasons is why it is so important for families, but particularly students, to be connected to the Student Services or Disability Resource Office at their new educational setting. This slide illustrates a key takeaway from this presentation. IEPs do not go to college. Students with IEPs in high school should expect different services when they go on to post-secondary education. IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, which has been governing their educational services through elementary and high school, shifts, and the laws that cover post-secondary education become the Americans with Disabilities and Rehabilitation Act, or ADA. So special education services in high school entitle students to free and appropriate public education and provides assistance in achieving educational success. In post-secondary education world, the colleges must only provide academic accommodations to assure students the same access to the coursework as their peers. And the curriculum is not modified in post-secondary education. So students must request accommodations and they must be approved by the college or program. It would be a good idea for families and students to become more familiar with ADA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act just to see how ADA can provide accommodations. If a student used academic accommodations in high school that they found to be effective, please be sure that those are identified and documented, described in detail in the last IEP or in the summary that is provided to the new post-secondary education program. The end of high school brings many changes, not only for the student, but also for the family. One big change is the role that the family takes in the educational program of the student. During high school years, parents are often the main spokesperson and advocate for their student, but this is not the case in post-secondary education. In college, the relationship shifts to being between the school and the student. The student moves to taking main responsibility for his or her advocacy that needs to happen. Colleges have high expectations that a student has the skills they need to do the college level work, and the concerns and opinions of families are usually not even considered. Students must be prepared to take responsibility for their academic success. That includes being familiar with the needs and accommodations that have proven to be successful for them during high school, and to advocate for those accommodations in post-secondary. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, outlines some of these changing roles. FERPA prohibits colleges from discussing confidential information, including a student's grades, with families without a signed waiver from the student. FERPA states that at age 18, students become the guardian of their own educational records and have the right to access or amend high school records. This means that colleges cannot share educational information about a student without a signed waiver. This can be a change and a challenge for families, as many have been very involved throughout their child's education. Some families feel they might have the right to know how their youth is doing in college, but it is not legal for the colleges to share this type of information. College instructors also don't generally welcome questions or input from families. Families are, of course, still encouraged to be involved with their youth, but this role becomes more of a mentor than a coordinator or active advocate. Families can advise, but no longer have decision-making authority. Now that we've discussed the importance of post-secondary education and how it will differ from the education that students receive in high school, let's talk about how can we prepare for success in that post-secondary education during the transition planning time or while the student is still in high school. Preparing for college in high school. Let's look at some things that can be done while students are still in high school preparing for post-secondary education. One of the most important factors is to establish and maintain high expectations for that student. Have the expectation that college is a possibility. With proper planning and accommodations, students with all types of disabilities can take advantage of the opportunities that colleges and other post-secondary education programs offer. Another easy thing that can be done is to begin talking to your youth early. It's never too early to let your child know that college is an option. The earlier youth realize that college is a possibility, the more likely they are to choose it and pursue it. Document successful accommodations. We talked a little bit about this earlier with the IEP, but it notes repeating that it's important to document those accommodations that are successful for the student and be as specific as possible. Practice self-advocacy skills. This cannot be highlighted enough, that during high school, when it's familiar and when the student has more independent or individual assistance, that is the time when self-advocacy skills should truly be practiced as much as possible. And the IEP meetings are a good place to do that, as well as just basic interactions in classrooms with teachers or guidance counselors or work experiences. The last thing that's important is to be aware of the impact of waiving requirements or over-modifying courses. A student in high school special education may be given the option to waive or substitute classes or coursework. This might be effective for promoting high school graduation, but it may have a negative impact on meeting the college entrance requirements or finishing prerequisites for other post-secondary education programs. So just be aware of that, be cautious, and another reason why it is important to start becoming familiar with or do research about the programs that you feel the student might be interested in or that matches their skills and interests, as well as what they would like to explore in their post-secondary. So now that we've reviewed some of the generalities that can be done while students are in high school, let's look at more specific activities. Now these slides are just examples of what can be done in high school to prepare for post-secondary education. These truly are just examples and suggestions and not an exhaustive list. Students are encouraged to meet with their guidance counselors and map out courses of study that builds on college-level academic skills and addressing those college requirements. And that is also something that the IEP team should definitely be aware of and look at together. Taking courses that lead to graduation and maintaining good grades. Taking appropriate courses and earning good grades are important for college prep, as is for any student. Participate in the IEP meetings. IEP participation can help build those self-advocacy skills that we talked about. It is their future that's being planned, so the students need to be involved as much as possible. They should be active participants in their meetings and take a role in setting their long-term goals and seeking to understand the areas where they need to improve, understanding the accommodations that work for them. IEP should reflect the long-term goals, and that could include attending college. If a student is planning to attend some type of post-secondary education after high school, that needs to be indicated on the IEP. Goals and activities build academic skills, and they support college and career exploration and develops one understanding of their disability and the accommodations. Exploring their career interests, maybe taking some inventories. There are several different programs around the state or systems that districts have used to take career interest inventories, finding out what students are interested in pursuing. Specific careers often require specific skills that can be developed or start to be developed in high school. Asking about the ICAP or other available programs through the school if they're not already available. Align the courses of study to meet the college entrance requirements. Work with the guidance counselors. They are very familiar with those requirements, and the IEP team to create a plan that maps out how the high school courses work and activities that lead to attending post-secondary education. And the plan can be modified as the student progresses through high school. We all know that things change, but at least being aware of and having those important conversations while still in high school is imperative. After 9th grade, let's move on to 10th through 12th grade and looking at examples of activities that can be done. Of course, continuing courses of study that lead to graduation, fulfilling those graduation requirements is key, as well as keeping in mind course studies that can help students fulfill any college prerequisites. Also, it's important for families, parents, and students to be aware of and familiar with the graduation date that it is documented on the IEP. If for some reason that does not align with what you as families or parents are anticipating as the graduation date, please don't wait to discuss that with the IEP team. All team members need to be very clear and on the same page when planning for the student's graduation. Begin having the high school coursework align with the student's career interests. Have that reflect, especially if there are choices between two courses, the one that would help them to get accepted into a post-secondary skill program or college, that is the one that should be chosen. So just keeping that in mind as deciding which courses to take. Research the post-secondary learning options. Identifying where you can get the college information and really start researching the schools. There are so many different options. This step really should not be bypassed, and don't leave it up to guidance counselors. They can certainly be involved, and IEP or high school teachers can be great resources, but schools should be thoroughly researched by not only the family, but including the student in that activity is important as well. Then becoming familiar with the IEP. Students should really be involved in this important step in the transition process. Being able to articulate and understand one's disability and the needs related to that is a critical advocating skill, and that they're going to need, as we discussed, they are going to be the key advocators for themselves in post-secondary education environments. And in high school, it's a safe and familiar place for students to practice these skills. Requesting accommodations for any sort of entrance tests that may be needed, practicing those advocacy skills again, contacting the College Disability Student Services. We'll talk a little bit more about that more in depth in a couple minutes. And gathering the necessary documentation. This is important, not only for the application for the school, but documentation of the disability, as well as a summary of what transpired or what happened during the student's high school years. Let's look a little more closely at the supports and services that are available in post-secondary education. Once a post-secondary education environment has been selected, the Disability Student Services Office needs to be contacted as well. Hopefully throughout the research process, that has been considered and looked into. So maybe you've already been contacted prior to even applying or being accepted into the program. These offices will be able to offer much assistance and guidance about the services that can be provided to help accommodate one's disability and to get the access to that coursework and opportunities that we talked about. A school does not need to have a program, so to speak, just a point person for students with disabilities. A college's Disability Student Services, or DSS office, is the main source for assistance. They can assist students in gaining accommodations that are needed, and they can visit with prospective students and their families. And this could be an activity for a student's IEP where self-advocacy skills could be practiced. I'll just note here that it might be referred to as different names in different colleges. It might be the Student Resource Center or something like that. But if it not is a whole office, be sure that you can identify a point person for the student to access while they are attending that post-secondary. Services vary greatly from school to school. So again, that might be a good time while you're researching options to look at. The depth of services varies. Like I said, meeting with those DSS or the student services prior to committing will help a student decide on a good fit or a match for the best post-secondary education setting for them. It's important not to assume that the services will be all available to them, because as we talked about in one of the previous slides, accommodations have to be requested and then approved. So it's important to know. Services and supports are also available through the general student service programs. So all of those programs that are available to students without disabilities or the general population are still available to those students with disabilities as well. So that goes for academic supports, health, employment, campus life, tutoring, all of those things are also available to the students with disabilities. We already discussed the differences that exist between high school and post-secondary education services, but let's look more specifically at the accommodations that are provided during post-secondary education. Colleges need only to provide equal access to education. In high school, it talked about having students' IDEA established that success and progress needed to be made. And in the post-secondary world, it only must ensure that students have the same access to the education. So I think that this illustration really shows the difference. If you look at the equality where all three of those students received the same, it wasn't necessarily resulting in the same access. Whereas one student needed two boxes to stand on, one needed one, and one didn't need any, then that was when access was provided. So accommodations should be provided at no cost to the students, but personal services are the responsibility of the individual. And the bottom line, important for families and students to remember, is that colleges have the final say about accommodations. And oftentimes, accommodations are negotiated per class by instructor to instructor, and it's negotiated with that disability student services office that the student should very much be aware of what is being requested and what is accepted before starting classes. The first step in securing academic accommodations based on disability is to provide documentation of a disability to the new post-secondary school's Disability Student Services Office, or that point person that has been identified as such. It's very important not to assume that students who received special education services in high school will automatically gain accommodations in college. That is not the case. Students must provide proof of a disability and the need for accommodations. So getting that documentation is critical. The IEP is definitely one piece of that. Some schools will ask for a supports for accommodation request, or a SAR, it's sometimes referred to as. Some colleges may ask for additional information documenting the disability. If a student's existing documentation does not meet the college's requirements, it might be necessary for the family to update the disability evaluation. And if that is the case, families are responsible to pay for the new evaluation that is done. Parents should also begin compiling the information way before enrolling into colleges. So getting those documentations together and keeping copies or keeping a folder on your home computer or laptop with electronic copies of those is a really good idea. Disability disclosure is a term that is talked about when people with disabilities express and explain their disabilities as well as the accommodations that are needed. A really good resource is listed on this slide, that is the 411 on disability disclosure. If you have time at some point in this transition planning process, I would suggest taking the time to take a look at that in more depth. Two forms of disability documentation that are particularly important or relevant for high school students are the post-secondary summary of living, learning, and working, and the support for accommodation requests. These are two forms that are available to IEP teams to be completed when a student exits special education at the high school graduation or at the maximum age of 21. Both forms provide a summary of the student's academic achievement, functional performance, and include recommendations on how to assist the student in meeting his or her post-secondary goals. It can also document, again, as well as on the IEP, those accommodations that have proven to be successful for the student can and should be documented here. Another thing to remember is that the student should be involved in developing either of these documents to the maximum extent possible. They need to be aware of and be able to talk about or communicate what accommodations are needed, as well as what they did complete during their high school years. The Summary for Post-Secondary Living, Learning, and Working, or the PSS, provides a description of the supports and services that were provided in high school, like we talked about, while pursuing the post-secondary goals or expectations designed specifically for that student. It also documents recommended resources and contact information for the student and family. It's a document to use with post-secondary agencies or programs. For example, IVRS that we talked about earlier will use this form to assist the student in making appropriate arrangements for accommodations and/or support services. A sample PSS form can be found at this website, iowaideainformation.org. The other form of disability documentation most often used by high school IEP teams is the Support for Accommodation Request, or the SAR. Some colleges or post-secondary programs are not requiring this anymore, but it's a good idea for the IEP team to get in the habit of completing these for the students as they finish high school. The SAR provides much of the same information as the PSS that we just discussed. It's information about how the student qualified for IDEA eligibility, and it supports requests for accommodations and academic adjustments or post-secondary aids that a student might require in order to access the coursework available at the post-secondary program. The documentation also indicates if the student's disability substantially limits some of the major life activity of the student and how they might access the education provided there. Another valuable resource for students and families, both while in high school and after, is Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services, or IVRS. This is a state-run, federally funded program designed to help qualified people with disabilities prepare for, find, and maintain employment. This is a program that you must qualify for, and a person will be found eligible for these services based on 1, the presence of a disability, 2, the impact of that disability on employment, and 3, the individual's ability to benefit from the services provided. IVRS has a wide range of services available. Some of these include helping with the decision to attend college or looking at other post-secondary school options that can lead to positive employment outcomes. IVRS can support people with disabilities who wish to pursue those post-secondary education. IVRS may assist in the cost of those post-secondary learning if the training leads to a completion of a career goal that's listed on the individual plan for employment. So that's definitely something to inquire about and worth asking. And again, helpful for IEP teams during the planning process while still in high school. IVRS provides counselors at every community college. This can be very beneficial. It's in addition to those personnel at the Disability Student Services Office that can be a resource and assistance to those students trying to either acquire the accommodations needed or make those career plans for beyond their post-secondary learning. They can also help with accessing other training options like apprenticeships or on-the-job training, mentors. College is not the only option for post-secondary education and training. That's important to remember. So another important thing to remember is to ask, inquire about IVRS services while the student is still in high school. Counselors can participate in the IEP meetings They can provide IEP teams with service options and lots of information. They are a wealth of information about the options that are available. So definitely, I would recommend taking a look at that website, ivrs.iowa.gov. There's actually some specific sections for high school students in the planning and preparation for leaving high school, as well as descriptions and explanations about services available to young adults and adults with disabilities. It is also worth noting during this that the Iowa Department for the Blind serves people who are blind and visually impaired in similar ways to IVRS. Another option for students that differs from some of the others that we've talked about are called 4+ programs. These programs are secondary programs designed for students ages 18 to 21 with disabilities to work on transition goals that are unmet, to prepare for post-secondary learning or employment. The important thing to remember and the big takeaway from this is that 4+ programs are secondary programs, meaning that they are still connected to the high school. And in order for a student to participate in 4+ programming, they must not graduate before attending. 4+ programs do not usually take place on high school campuses. They are not meant to provide a degree or certificate or any kind of college experience. They are appropriate if learning a skill takes a little bit longer for a student to get proficient, and if a non-high school setting is preferred for a student to practice those skills and to acquire those skills necessary for greater success after high school, it might be a good option for the IEP team to consider. As talked about earlier, some students who enter post-secondary education will have to take some remedial courses to build up those academic skills. If a college pre-placement test indicate that some of those remedial skills are needed, a student may wish to explore 4+ programming to help build up those academic skills prior to entering college. The IEP team might want to explore this option, but since the student is still responsibility of the high school, the IEP team would remain in place and would remain having responsibility to that student's programming. IEP teams will need to discuss and determine if 4+ programming is an option. At the bottom is linked to a PDF that is put out by the Iowa Department of Education all about 4+ programming. We'll wrap up by discussing just a couple of additional notes. It's important for families and IEP teams to know that accommodations are available to students with disabilities on any pre-placement or prerequisite test or exam, ACTs, SATs. Some colleges and post-secondary programs are using these a little bit less, but it is important to know that those accommodations that were successful in high school may also be requested for taking those tests. Another important note is that there may be some scholarships or financial aid available for students with disabilities. It's important to just talk to the high school guidance counselors. Also, if there are specific post-secondary programs that the student is interested in, reaching out and finding if there's something available through them. Another good resource or website is thinkcollege.net for more information. Speaking of valuable resources, here are 4 others that would be worth a closer look at on your own time. The Transition Guide and Understanding College and Career Readiness are 2 resources put together by the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, or OSEP, in the U.S. Department of Ed. The third is an Iowa Department of Education resource for all things related to special education, including transition to beyond high school and planning for that transition. TransitionIowa.org is also a website designed specifically for all things related to the transition of students from high school to adult living, learning, and working. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Wishing you all the best as you plan for that post-secondary education. Never stop learning because life never stops teaching.